The Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the IGC. My name is Jason Abbott. I'm joined again by Matt Abbott.
Hello.
Today we're going to be doing a little bit of talking about the city of Detroit. But first, let's get to some business. Just want to say thanks for subscribing, sharing, getting the word out, checking us out on social media, sending out some retweets, and sharing some stories on Facebook. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to intellectualgentlemensclub.com/support. You'll find our affiliate sponsors there for Amazon, Onnit.com, and Audible.com. We also have a PayPal button where you can donate through there if you'd like. I always encourage everybody to donate to the previous guests if you can instead of us. But if you have anything left over, send it our way. We will not refuse. So let me introduce our guest today. Her name is Jean Scheffler. She is a first-time author, and she grew up at south of Detroit, fascinated by early industrial Detroit. Worked as a nurse and enjoyed talking to storytellers about some of the golden ages of the past. And her first book here is the historical fiction called The Sugar House. Jean, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
One of our Twitter followers, he reached out and thought I should have you on the show. He really enjoyed your book. He is Johnny Utah Bra on Twitter. That's his handle there if you guys want to reach out to him. Thanks, Johnny, for hooking us up. He lives in Arizona. He used to live in Michigan, apparently, and he likes all kind of nostalgic things about Detroit. So how did you do some of the research behind this book here?
Well, excuse me, I've always been interested in Detroit, and it kind of started way back when I was a child, where my grandfather would share stories with me about growing up in Detroit. And he would share stories about he actually quit school in the third grade to work for the Purple Gang. And I grew up Polish Catholic, so he didn't share very violent stories or anything, too risque. But he would share stories, and he had 9 granddaughters, and he would make us laugh. And we were fascinated by the way he grew up. And he quit school in third grade, so probably thought that was pretty romantic. And when we were children,
Could we do the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he had some great stories. So I guess I developed a love of history, and Detroit, a love for Detroit, way back then. And then, when I became a nurse, I was a gerontology nurse in my, early 20s, and I was afternoon shift. So once the downtime kind of hit around 9 o'clock, 9:30, and everybody's kind of going to bed, I would sneak off and, listen to stories that, if I'd sit next to someone's bed and say, hey, tell me your secrets, tell me what you learned about life or things like that. And they would tell me, I had World War II vets, World War I vets even at that time taken care of. And I heard great stories about growing up in Detroit or, just what things were like back then. So that's kind of where it started. And then as far as my research, when I began researching my book, I probably read about 400 books, to prepare myself. I did a lot of research on the teens, 20s, and 30s. I had three-ring binders that I prepared regarding like clothing and dialects and tech, and housing costs and food costs, and I had that for each of the 3 decades that I was writing about. And then I would watch movies from that time, go down to the library, the Detroit Library, and I would read the microfiche. And I would read it for hours and take notes. And I feel like that was a lot of my really good research, was reading the newspaper articles of the time, because I got a really, really good feel for, how people spoke, what they were buying, their advertisements, what they were cooking even, because
Right.
Back then they always had recipes in there. And so I would read the microfiche for hours, and then I would make it an everyday practice also, where if my character, for example, he makes pierogies and he's around 8 or 9, my son was near that age at the time, so we would make pierogies and I would watch how he would, be able to
Very cool.
form the dough, and so we'd make the food, or we would go on field trips. My husband's favorite field trip was to the Walkerville, the Canadian Club factory, and where you get to do a tour, and they have a place in the basement actually that has bullet holes in it, where they say Al Capone came over and made his deals with the distillery. And
where is this place at?
That's in Walkerville, Ontario.
Okay.
And they do tours right now still. It's very reasonable, and it's very interesting. I think it's like about a 2-hour tour they give you, and they were discussing it during the Boardwalk Empire when that was really big, and so they do a lot of Prohibition talk during that tour too. But we would go down to the Boston Edison district, and we would just do a lot of, I'm so close. I'm 20 minutes from Detroit, so I could just pop in the car and go down and see a lot of the things that I was going to write about anyway. So I guess that's a really long answer, but I did I did a ton of research, and I tried to think of everything. I even bought CDs and listened to music, or I listened to radio casts that they have them on tape from the 20s and things. I would listen to the radio. So anything I can think of to try to
just totally immerse yourself in that era.
Yeah, really.
That's great.
So how long would you say your research took you on this journey for the book?
I'd say the research was probably a couple years, and while I was writing, of course, I was still doing researching, and the actual writing process took me about a year.
Okay.
And then it was a little bit more because of the editing and everything that goes in after that. But.
Okay. So your book takes place, like you said, 20s and 30s, and I was doing a little research myself about the city of Detroit. I grew up here. In Metro Detroit, I should say. Matt, you are a resident of the city of Detroit, or are you in Hamtramck?
I just moved back to Hamtramck last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're much more versed on the city of Detroit than I.
Yeah. I've lived down there often. I mean, for pretty 16 years, about, give or take a few stints out, but we just moved from Southwest Detroit back to Hamtramck. They usually move twice a year. And Hamtramck is usually one of those each year.
So in the 20s, it looks like there was a gigantic population explosion. It looks like it went from about 800,000 the next decade. It increased by, I don't know, what was it, at least 50%, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that around? I mean, was that around the industrial age for the autos, or?
A lot of it was based on the cars. People started coming to Detroit actually because they were big industrial for railroad cars, which is why Detroit was such a great place to start the automobiles, because everything was already in place in regards to they were building the railroad cars here. And then once they started building the automobiles here, then people just started coming. Thousands and thousands of people were coming to the train station every day. Just thousands. I can't even imagine living in a city where there are thousands of people getting off and saying, "Okay, I need a place to live."
Kind of like at Ellis Island in New York, when people are coming over there,
right,
just pouring over there, looking for a better opportunity.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So around this time, Prohibition was going on at the same time. What year did Prohibition start?
Prohibition started in Michigan in 1918, and I don't always remember the exact factual dates, but then for a while people were going down to this Ohio, because Ohio had not started Prohibition yet. Mm-hmm. But officially then across the nation it was 1920.
Wow. Yeah, that was a bummer of a time, wasn't it?
For women, actually, it was a really great time, because before that, they'd never been allowed to go to bars or anything. And then once Prohibition started, speakeasies just popped up everywhere. And then because they were illegal, women started to get a lot more freedom.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, I was just reading an article the other day about how Hamtramck in particular had the most bars at one time
per capita.
Yeah, than anywhere else in the U.S. I think at one time there was 300 or 400 bars, and Hamtramck is about 2 miles by 2 miles,
Mm-hmm.
And what happened from what I read was that all the families that were there, everybody was struggling, and so people just built on additions to their house to where they could have bars, and kind of did it that way. I found it was pretty interesting. You can still see the remnants of it in Hamtramck.
Are you talking about legal bars or speakeasies?
I think more speakeasies during that time, and then later on that they kind of, once it got legalized again, that so a lot of those turned legal, from what I
Okay. I know that they estimate there was between 25 and 35,000 that popped up in Detroit during Prohibition.
Wow.
Yeah, people like to drink. That's for sure.
And it's cool. You always hear in the in the news about how, especially with all the revitalizing that they're doing in Detroit right now, how they'll have an old building that they're turning into another new restaurant or bar, and they come up with all these clues of the times where the Purple Gang and all the Prohibition era stuff that has been uncovered since all this new construction has started in the city is pretty cool.
And I'm so thankful that they're understanding the importance and they're trying to save those things or reuse them in different places they're building. And I'm glad they're not just throwing those things away, because we need to save all our history that we can.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's one thing you can see in Detroit is if you drive around, there's just tons of architecturally unique buildings everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, they actually call it the Renaissance City. I mean, when you enter the city of Detroit, it says the Renaissance City, established 1701. So.
Or they call it the Paris of the Midwest.
Yeah, that's yeah. Why is it called the Paris of the Midwest?
And that's
because of the layout?
One of the reasons I wanted to tell this story is I had realized that the story really had not been told. I know the story of Prohibition had been told many times, but as far as Detroit, there are not that many historical stories about the city of Detroit. I think there are more and more coming out every day from local authors, but they're just, when I started anyway, there really weren't any, and especially about that time. And I would take my kids down to Detroit, and or even my friends, and they really didn't understand the unique history we have here. And I really wanted to showcase it in a way that, wouldn't be reading a history book, which is why I made it historical fiction, but everything in it is historically correct. So that you're reading and you're learning and you're understanding the importance. And I wrote it in a PG-13 kind of format, so even though it has gangs in it, so that the junior high kids can even read it and understand what a special place we come from. Mm-hmm. And I think if you instill that in them young, they get it. Like where now my children, have obviously they've read their mom's book, and they're in junior high. And so when we go down to a Red Wing game or something, they say, "Hey, there's the book Cadillac," and that was one of the first hotels that had air conditioning. And and they're getting it now. Why Woodward is number one, because we were the first street with the first stoplight in the world.
Detroit has been number one for so many things that people just don't even they take for granted or just don't know about.
Exactly.
I think also is with the economic downturn since '08 especially. And now the city's in bankruptcy and all that. People like to hate on Detroit a lot, but there is a rich history here, and there's a rich culture here as well. I mean, look at it. Detroit used to be called the Arsenal of Democracy, and we were supplying everything for this country. For a long time, we were seemed to be the central industrial part of this country. It seemed like, but what really when I'm glad that you wrote this book, to where it's historical fiction, because I think a lot of times kids, you got to kind of portray it that way to make them learn certain things. And, and I hear it all the time. I grew up in Livonia, and I've lived in Detroit for the last 16 years. And, a lot of times parents from the suburbs, they tell their kids and they install this fear in the kids that don't go to Detroit. Yeah. It's all bad. And it's so far from the truth, And I'm glad that finally Detroit's getting some spotlight on some of the good things that's happening for once. It's nice.
Absolutely, and I think for me anyway, as a historical author, to look back is to look forward, and I really think that it's important. And besides that, all these things that we have down there, the amazing cathedrals, the amazing buildings, the parks, the things that our ancestors. That my ancestors, that your ancestors have created for us, and they worked so hard for, and we need to appreciate the sacrifice they gave to create these things, and then left them for us, and we need to honor that. I mean, those cathedrals down there, like I have St. Josephat in my, which is the church at Mac and 75, the three-towered, three-tiered church. That is a beautiful church, and those churches cannot be built anymore. I mean, you just can't build those anymore.
Do we even have masons out there that could even handle a job like that? Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't think we could afford it.
Yeah. Right.
And my great grandparents, they probably made $3 a day, but they probably contributed $1 a week out of that to make these churches. I mean, those people didn't have any money. They weren't like, it wasn't like they were super rich making these, building these cathedrals, but they meant something to them, and they wanted to leave that for us. And I think we need to honor their memory and honor what they provided and their sacrifice, and keep these things for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. It's coming too quick, I think, that to instead of preserving some of these historical places, that let's just level them and start over.
Mm-hmm. Oh, somebody wants
Which,
to buy
I can understand people just wanting and jumping the gun quick to get things done in Detroit any way possible, as long as there's something new happening. But there's so much history especially with architecture, like you were saying. And you look at these churches now, and I think that church that you were mentioning in particular at Mac and 75 are in like desperate trouble to even save some of the stained glass windows that are still in those churches and stuff. They're struggling to even preserve anything in those churches. And now you have the thieves that are stealing all the wiring and air conditioning units from these places. And it's a shame, man. But I think they're definitely on the upswing for once, as far as I can remember. I've never remembered anyone moving to Detroit, and these past couple years, all sorts of creative people, musicians, artists are flocking to the city right now, and it's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah. So, Gene, going back to Prohibition, what was the you mentioned the Purple Game. I'm sorry, the Purple Game.
Mm-hmm.
Your grandfather was in. That was a pretty heavy duty type of thing when I was looking up the Purple Gang. I mean, they held up Al Capone from basically taking over the reins in Detroit, and there was bloodbaths here, and by the end of the 30s, they were all dead or in jail. So Can you paint us a picture of what it was like for gangs back then?
Well, as far as the Purple Gang, they were known for their violence, and to me, Al Capone was kind of a showboater and smart. But to me, the Purple Gang, they were more brute strength.
Got their hands dirty.
I think they were smart too, but yeah, I think they just overpowered people. Mm-hmm. And they had the benefit of being in a place where 75% of all the liquor that came into the United States during that decade came right through Detroit, or the
Detroit
area
River,
of Detroit, right through the Detroit River. Be it Grosse Ile, Ecorse, St. Clair, it all came right through here.
Is that because? I'm sorry. Is that because it was legal in Canada at that time?
Well, it was legal in Canada to. How did that go?
Because we're a border city, people. If you don't know about the city of Detroit on the border here, we border Windsor. Right, and well, it's so close. I mean, back then the river would freeze, so they could easily drive their cars across all the time. That they could boat. I mean, it's an eighth of a mile in some places across. I mean, so they could boat.
They didn't really have the homeland security back then that we have now.
Well, it's interesting that they did not, and in the beginning it was very easy for them to start running, and they would have 14-year-olds going across, and that's why it is believable in my book and how I have my grandfather posing as a fisherman, a fisher boy with an older man, and they're smuggling liquor back and forth. The Coast Guard was pretty much non-existent for the first few years of Prohibition, or perhaps they didn't really care that much, or maybe they were being bought off. So there was a lot of little groups of people. Somebody living on the river might just go buy a rowboat for $50, and they could make $1,000 on their first load bringing over liquor.
Wow.
The money was outrageous, but once the gang started getting bigger and bigger, then the Coast Guard started getting bigger, and then they had to get fancier with their techniques and sneakier with their techniques of how they were smuggling the liquor across the river. And the Purple Gang, they did not just have their hand in liquor. They had gambling houses, and they ran the Dry Cleaners Association, and they put their hand out and their fingers into everything they could possibly think of.
So they were probably in like prostitution and maybe other drugs and things like that.
I think a lot of gambling.
Yeah.
A lot of gambling houses, which apparently you would go. My understanding from what I've read, they would go to this gambling house and you would bet, and they would start with I think they had started with the telegraph system somehow. I never quite understood exactly how, but somehow that would be communicated, and they had quite a bit of their money that way. And then they also, tried to take their take of every speakeasy that popped up. for protection money
right.
too.
Stronghold.
Wow.
Yes.
So, back in Prohibition, was it easier to find like hard liquor or beer? Was beer hard to come by? What was it like as far as the product that you could get?
I think either were easy, and there's a quote, and I'm gonna misquote it, but
It's okay, I butcher things up all the time.
it's actually at the Detroit Historical Museum right now. They're doing an exhibition about drinking in Detroit, and it's Prohibition through the 70s, and it's a great little exhibition. They have a quote in there that says I think it was a fire chief. Everybody will have to go down in the museum and check it out and get the right quote. But it's something about it was really hard to get a drink in Detroit unless you walked 6 feet and yelled really loud above the din at the bar. So it was like they were trying to say how ridiculous it was,
Just
how
a joke.
ridiculously easy it was to get a drink during Prohibition.
Now, was it obviously probably much easier in Detroit to get a drink than it was in probably, say, Kentucky or Oklahoma or something like that during Prohibition, am I right?
I would assume so. I mean, I didn't research Kentucky.
Kentucky and them, they had the moonshine going.
Right,
for them.
yeah, they were already
Right.
set up shop. I'm
True.
sure, yeah. Well, when we're talking about the Purple Gang, did they ever have like a rival? Like, we got the Bloods and the Crips, red and blue. Was there like purple and green back then, or was there any rival, or they just crushed anybody as soon as they popped up?
They had a rival. Well, they had a rivalry at a time for with the Italian gang downriver, and so they used to have shootouts actually down Biddle Avenue, which is what West Jefferson's called in Wyandotte, and they would have shootouts down all the time because they were fighting with the Italian gang. I don't think they have an official name. There was just
What
different.
ethnicity were the Purple Gang?
They were actually Jewish
Right.
mobsters.
Wow.
And so everyone asked me, because I'm Polish and I write a lot about Polish heritage and tradition in the book, and they say, well, how would your grandfather quit school and work for Jewish mobsters? You're obviously, Polish Catholic. But they were Jewish from Germany and Poland. So I believe my grandfather, actually finding out later, he kind of got in a little bit of trouble at school. So when you did that, you went to like a school in Detroit, and I honestly can't remember the name of it either, but and I think that's where he supposedly met them. And because they were all kind of mischievous, and that's how he started. He was just running errands for them, but
That's how a lot of people start.
yeah. And as far as what really happened, I'm sure my grandfather would never have shared that with me anyway. So, a lot of it's research and some of it's folklore and some of it's stories that people have told me that they know or have done, or their brother or uncle. So.
Yeah, we kind of have that in our family as well. We have, we're our Italian side. We have some mob histories with that, which is pretty cool to go back in history. And our cousin put together a big book on that. But still, then, like, we never got the full story. Everything seems kind of not really sure if it happened or not.
One thing we know for sure is that my grandmother, I believe she came from a family of 7, perhaps 9. I think it was 7. But she was the baby. And in the middle of the night, their maiden name was Fantozzi at the time. In the middle of the night in Texas, or in the middle of the night in Detroit, they had to pack everybody up in the family and move down to Texas because
Changed their name.
There was some serious shit going down.
Wow.
We don't know exactly what happened. So they actually changed their name. It's a different Italian name at this point.
No, they changed it to Petrak, which sounded more.
No. There's there's a wide variety of people that are come from our roots, but that's one story that we remember from what we were told when we were kids. So
wow, that's really interesting.
yeah, I wanted to ask you about all the research you did with Prohibition with alcohol. Do you see modern day times? Do you see the same patterns happening with marijuana?
People do compare that quite a bit, and so yeah, it is very similar. I don't really follow the marijuana issue very much, but I do see that it's very similar. Yes, absolutely, okay. And I see people compare it quite often.
So back when they were when alcohol was illegal, did you notice during your research with the microfiches and all that, was there any propaganda that like really stood out to you when you were looking through the newspaper about how alcohol was bad and the reasons why it's illegal now? And were there justifications in the papers that people just kind of went along with?
You know, I actually kind of see what sticks out in my mind from things that I saw was the other way, where there's advertisements of why we should have beer, and they actually have. I've seen pictures of a baby in a high chair drinking a beer and saying it's good. It gives like robust health to your child. to a woman that's pregnant and holding another baby drinking a beer, like that's very extreme. But I've seen they have a lot of propaganda that way as far as not having prohibition,
now,
fighting prohibition.
Who was on the forefront of the prohibition exactly? I know, because it seems to me like there was a lot more people that were against it, and that, you know, because of the prohibition, a lot of people made a lot of money from prohibition. So, you know, like you said, Jason, the same with the marijuana trade. You have growers that are all for legalization, and you have a lot of growers that don't want it legalized because they're making so much money from it being illegal.
Yeah,
you know?
We talked with Adam Scorgi about that, so...
Yeah, I mean, as far as prohibition starting in 1920, they had been fighting that fight for probably 100 years before that. I believe it was Kentucky that actually had prohibition back in the 1800s before, you know, the rest of the nation.
Is it a religious thing, or?
Well, part of it is you were a man if you could drink hard liquor, and hard liquor was at times so extreme with some people that there was a movement because the men were not taking care of their families, and the women, you had no way to work. And so the men, you had to drink to prove you were a man, and then you drank so much that you couldn't fulfill your manly things that you needed to do, work and take care of your family. And then, you know, there was a lot of domestic abuse at that time. And so when the husband or the farmer would come home, you know, after drinking a pint of, and the liquor was, you know, so strong, and come home and you know, beat his wife and his children, and the women had nothing. They could do nothing about it, basically. I mean, they had no place to go, no job resources, especially rurally. And so that was a big fight for prohibition, because they felt like, you know, families were falling apart and people were not living the way they should, really, and that's why they wanted to have prohibition. I think they had the right idea. I mean, they wanted to do the right thing, but it just obviously went very, very wrong.
Well, it's the same with today. I think, you know, education is more of the tool to use with that people, most governments entities seem to miss. Education works best. But.
Oh, I agree, and I mean everything in moderation.
Right.
So I mean, that's a major thing.
When did Prohibition end?
It ended. Oh, you guys are really pushing me with my numbers here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I think like 1931, 1932. It was after the stock market crashed, and you know they had to start turning things around, and I think that was one way.
Let the people drink.
Yeah.
Well, the revenues that I'm sure that would you
the
would
revenues.
get from it too.
Yeah, because they were actually surprised that Prohibition passed, because they you know, because the revenues beforehand, you know, and so they, you know, the government didn't make any money off of liquor for 10 years.
Yeah. See, again, I'm seeing the similarities with marijuana, because like with the states of Colorado and Washington, they're finding that they're making tons of capital.
Well, I think that's no surprise to anybody. Right. I mean, everybody knew that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that was one of the things. Like, well, you won't. Is the risk worth the reward?
I think
there hasn't been a hole that's opened up and swallowed the earth yet.
Well, with all prohibition, it's based on fear, and it's based on you can't handle this. Well, let us make the decisions for you. You know, it's the same
system of control.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's always will be, and it's not the last time there's been prohibition. You know, I'm sure there's more on the way.
Yeah.
Well, and I do agree. I do believe that there should be some kind of way to monitor it, because millions of people died because of poor alcohol, the way the alcohol was made. If it didn't come from Canada and people were making it in their homes, you know, if they make it incorrectly, or they're splitting it up and, you know, putting different things in there that shouldn't be.
Go blind.
Yeah, you hear that.
So a lot of people got very sick, died, or became paralyzed, and so I think there should be some kind of monitoring for sure.
What happened as far as when things went wrong? What was it creating? Was it creating like a different chemical, like ether or something like that instead, or
there was
different types of
alcohol? There were different things. I know sometimes you could become paralyzed, and sometimes it was just instantaneous death. So I mean, you just had to be really careful where you got
rolling
your sources
the dice.
from. A lot of people, and that's what the thing is nice for Detroit is they were getting most of their liquor from Canada, so they were probably pretty safe. But I'm sure more into the country, it was a little more rolling the dice there for sure.
What do you think about the different cultural differences over the years since the 20s and the 30s? There's been a lot of different changes in the city of Detroit. Where do you think that we're heading now? And we spoke about it a little bit earlier, but what would you see as the pattern now? I see
an influx of people moving back to the city, which is, I think, the first time that I can recall. The time I wrote about was the heyday of Detroit. The time my parents remember, you could still call it the heyday of Detroit, the 50s, 60s, where, that you take a bus down on the weekend and go to Hudson. When I was growing up, we really didn't go down to Detroit. The stores were gone. We went to the mall. But I see it coming back. And, last week my kids were off. I took them down every single day and showed them different things, and it was not very expensive. And, we just walked into the Guardian building and stood there and looked at what an amazing building that is for half an hour, and pure Detroit's in there. And we looked through the shop, and, we went to American Coney, and we went down to Belle Isle. I mean, we just, walked around the city, and I think it's coming, and you see other people doing it. So you can see that, hopefully, then the kids are comfortable. Then, then when they graduate in 5-10 years, then maybe they'll be like, I want to live right in the city,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was last week. My kids were off as well, and we went down to the Michigan Science Center. It used to be the Detroit Science Center when we were growing up, Matt, and they closed it down for a number of years. Brought it back to life, and it's pretty cool in there. The kids had a great time. Anytime we get like across the city, they think it's like a big deal when we cross Telegraph. It's like, are we in Detroit yet? Are we in Detroit yet? Yep. Yep. And
the same was with us when we were going to Tiger games when we were kids. That was like the best thing ever.
Yep.
I knew when I was that age, when we were kids going to Tiger game, that as soon as I could, I'm splitting the suburbs and I'm moving to the city.
See, and I've been the opposite. I've always wanted to live kind of outside the city, and I live in suburbia now. But I always prefer to have some solitude. I would like to have a little bit more space. And Matt, you've always been like the city dude. So,
well, Jason, maybe you should move into the Indian Village there.
Yeah, there you go, Jay.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Indian Village.
Yeah,
we take a drive through there on Friday, and what beautiful homes! It's gorgeous.
Matt, you've had an opportunity to live in many different areas of Detroit: Corktown, Midtown.
I think I've pretty much covered downtown.
You haven't been to?
No, I think
Riverfront.
Yeah, I think I've covered all of the downtown.
What's your favorite area in Detroit, and why?
I mean, I really like living in Southwest Detroit. I like the community aspect out there. Everybody kind of looked out for each other, and it was like a different city. When you go down Verner, it reminded me of kind of like Brooklyn, kind of in New York. Which was cool that there was all these shops that were actually open. There were private, small businesses, and there wasn't huge grocery chains out there. And I think a lot of people that, don't realize that you can have a city operate on, you don't have to have big box stores all over the place. And, I think that's good. But I like living in Southwest. I love Hamtramck. I love the food out there. And, again, it's really multicultural, which is, I think, what a lot of Detroit is about too. But it's pretty amazing how much rent is going up in places like Corktown and Midtown. When I lived down there, it was, I had a 3-bedroom for $500, and now they're close to $1,000.
Yeah, and you're like you were saying, it's getting harder and harder to find a place at all. Not necessarily just the rent, but
never seen anything like it. And I'm all for it. There's always going to be pockets of places that are going to remain cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hamtramck's one of them. I think Southwest is one of them. And, you know, there a lot of people that are the anti-gentrification, that big discussion. You know, there's good and bad with all that. I think as long as there's progress in Detroit, it can't be all that bad. And, you know, Detroit's not going to lose its edge, I don't think. I don't think it will ever lose its edge. You know, people are thinking that this is going to be the next Chicago, and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Well, I was watching Vice on HBO. This is going back a few weeks ago, no, it wasn't. It wasn't on HBO. It was on their website, and they had a guy come to the city of Detroit and find out what. I'm sorry. This one was on HBO. They had a guy come to the city of Detroit to the scrap yards, and there's finding all these different Chinese buyers for this scrap metal.
That's what they sold the whole
out.
Tiger Stadium scrap to, was China. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're coming in droves. Basically, they're removing the infrastructure from Detroit, from these golden ages, like we're talking about, Gene, and then they're putting it on boats and putting it over to China. Then they're building stuff with our scrap and selling it back to us.
Yeah,
I mean,
we can learn a thing or two from that.
Right.
Wow.
You know, it's interesting to see, you know, how it's transitioned over the years. So, and also when you drive downtown, on your way down there, you see, you know, obvious signs of decay. You know, there's a lot of abandoned homes.
But I think people are getting sick and tired of, especially journalists coming from all over the world, to only document the decay. I think people are really getting sick of it. And, you know, like I said, if they pan the camera over to 90% of those shots, if they would pan the camera over, you know, 5 degrees, they would see something great happening, and they just choose not to show that side.
Well, there's a lot of people that are building up local parks. You know,
I mean, in the summer, I ride my bike everywhere. I don't need a car, and it's such an awesome bike accessible city. And even that, like, you have Slow Roll on Monday nights. That brings like almost 2,000 people every Monday.
Yeah, talk about what is that, Matt?
It's just a bunch of people that get on their bikes and take over the city streets, and they plan routes through different parts of Detroit, and
party
about
on
10,
wheels,
15 miles. You know, it's really cool, man. Yeah, I would suggest it's free for everybody. And just look that up on Facebook or the internet, Slow Roll Detroit.
Very cool. Yeah, there's a lot of independent restaurants have gotten a lot of names down there as well, too, instead of going to like Red Lobster or Olive Garden.
Speaking of, Gene, the name of your book is the Sugar House. I don't know if are you familiar with the Sugar House, the bar that just opened up on not too long ago, a couple years ago, on Michigan Avenue?
Yes, and actually, we get our name from the same thing, because the Purple Gang was actually originally called the Oakland Sugar House Gang.
Oh, okay.
And it was because they were on Oakland Street, and they had a sugar house where they would melt the sugar to make liquor, obviously more. During Prohibition, every family was allowed to have a certain amount of liquor in their house, be it for a religion or, you know, maybe it'd be like a 12-pack a week or something you were allowed to have, or 6-pack a week. I don't know what it's equivalent to. But so you were allowed to make a certain amount, but you were not allowed to sell it. You were allowed to make it, but you were not allowed to sell it. That's the rules under Prohibition. But so they were called the Oakland Sugar House Gang first. And as far as them becoming the Purple Gang, it became more when they had a lot more media, a lot of more newspaper coverage, and it started maybe in the late 20s or the middle 20s when they started being called the Purple Gang.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Actually, no one knows. All the research I've done, some say it was because a grocer one time they were doing something bad to a grocer. I don't take his card or something, and he said those boys aren't the right color. They're purple. Back from when they were teens. Or some people say it was a dry cleaning war, and they were trying to take over the Dry Cleaners Association, and so they poured purple dye all over the clothes. So there's different rumors, but no one knows exactly why they called them the Purple Gang.
Interesting. So did Hoffa? He came before basically Prohibition started, right? When the Teamsters were making their rise and everything.
I think Hoffa's after, because honestly, I didn't do any research on Hoffa.
Yeah, I think Hoffa's way after.
My fault. My bad, guys out there. Sorry about
Idiot.
that. Yeah. So where can people find your book, Gene? I mean, is it available on Amazon and everywhere else?
Yep, it's on Amazon, and I have it in a few stores locally, and I'm working to get it in a few stores in Detroit because I'm excited. I have people that find me on Twitter, and I do post a lot about the history of Detroit or things going on in Detroit on my Twitter account. And they'll say, "Hey, I'm flying into Detroit. Where can I get your book?" So I love that, and that was another thing. When I travel, I always go to a bookstore and try to grab something historical fiction if I can about the area, because I feel like when I get back and I read it, I get a whole other week of vacation. I feel like I'm still, you know what I mean? Like if I go to the Keys, then I get a book like that, and so I get excited that people, you know, come in Detroit and then they want to learn more about the city they're visiting, and they want to do it through my novel, and it's really thrilling for me. So yeah, definitely cool. Amazon and hopefully and some local stores downriver, and hopefully I'll be getting into a few stores in Detroit for sure.
Cool. You're a first-time author. What kind of writing obstacles did you find yourself getting into? Any kind of problems in specific? Writing blocks, anything like that?
I never had a writing block. I was really lucky, and I'll share with you why. As far as my difficulties, I'm a mother of 3, so drama with the kids or things like that. I got 2 myself. Okay, so when I write, I feel like, you know, I need to be uninterrupted. I'm one of those people. I need to write for a few hours. I can't write for 20 minutes and then go tie someone's shoe or, you know, whatever. So finding the time. Actually, when I finished my book, I laughed for a week, and I went to my parents' cottage because I just had to like sit down and finish. And I wrote, you know, 20 hours a day, and by myself for a week, and just to you know, because it's so hard to find that time when you have a family. Yeah. But I was really lucky. I had tried to write a novel before, but the story wasn't right. When I came finally upon this idea, I love this idea. I love the story so much that it was pretty easy. And then, you know, the research helps a lot for me as a writer. But I went down to Mount Olivet, and I had never been there to the cemetery where my great-grandparents were buried. I'd already written 7 chapters when I went down there. And I'm sitting there, and I found their grave markers, and I'm sitting there. It was a beautiful fall day. I'm sitting on the grass, just, you know, kind of taking it in, and it's a beautiful cemetery, and looking, and I look over to the left, and I see that my grandfather had a brother named Frank. Well, I had already written that he had a brother named Frank, but I had no idea he had a brother named Frank.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so I sat there, and I'll never forget, I'm sitting there, and I look up, and I'm like, who's writing this book? Wow. You know, to my grandpa, I'm like, because he had died before I was born of cancer, and you know, my family's just not big talkers. They don't, you know, talk about all that kind of stuff. And I had no idea, and I'd already written he had a little brother named Frank. And so so maybe that's why I didn't have writer's block. Maybe I felt like somebody was helping me along a lot of the way.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Very cool. Gene, what's your favorite Detroit memory, personally, about the city?
Oh, that's a good one because it changes every day. You know, like I said last week, I could say going to the Tigers game with the kids, and it was beautiful, or taking them to Belle Isle, and we went through, actually, I think that was kind of cool, is I had a couple pictures of my great-grandmother on Belle Isle at the conservatory, you know, where all the plants are. Mm-hmm. And we took pictures that were identical from the 1930s.
Photo project, right?
Yeah, and we stood in the same spot inside the conservatory, and we put them, you know, the black and white, and then ours next to it, and that was really neat. That was really cool that I got to stand. I've never met my great-grandmother. So it was really cool that I was standing in the exact same spot that she had, and that was really neat. And I want to reach out and have people do the same thing. You know, I mean, we all come from Detroit. Anyone living in this area, all our ancestors do. And reach out and find your family story and go down and, you know, see their churches and be a part of it.
Cool, Matt. How about you? What's your favorite memory of the city? I mean, you've been through some hard times, you've been through some good times.
I don't know, man. That's a loaded question. That's
it's unfair.
I don't know. It's the cool thing. I mean, living in Detroit. It has its ups and it has its downs, and just when you can't take it anymore, something awesome happens, and summer comes, and then everything's great again. You know, that's that's the hardest part is dealing with the winters and but like I said, like, you know, right when you can't handle it anymore, something happens, and there's nothing like Detroit in the summertime, man. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, my favorite memory of, it's funny you mentioned the Tigers game. My favorite memory is going to Tiger Stadium the first time. I don't know if I was like 6, 7 years old. I went down there with my grandpa and my dad. Matt, I don't know if you were there or not. I can't remember. But when I came out of the tunnel to look at the field, and I was a big baseball fan when I was a kid. When I came out of that tunnel and saw the expanse of the field, I'd never been in a sports venue before. I was just awestruck. And I always loved going to Tiger Stadium and walking down that hallway there, one of the ramps in the upper deck. And you know, you have the opportunity to drive by the old spot of Tiger Stadium now. There's a ball field there. I think everything's fenced off, but guys play pickup games.
Yeah,
there.
well, I mean, there's a crew of guys. I forget what they call themselves, but they're dedicated to that field, and they do that all for free. They come and
there's
cut
no
the
building
lawn.
left, by the way. Everything was knocked down. But the field is still there.
They take care of that whole field. They cut the lawn. They groom the field. They groom the dirt. I mean, they do that all of a labor of love from the former field. And you know, it would seem like it would make complete sense to actually make that a public baseball field, but we all know that Detroit tends to do the exact opposite sometimes of what makes sense. So.
Yeah.
I hope they do. You know, that was actually Navin Field before it was Tiger Stadium, and that is where Ty Cobb had his most stolen bases record was there. And that's like, for example, I include that in the book. Like, my character goes there and sees. You know, I try to keep those little snippets of history in there.
That's cool.
So people, so people get it. Like, oh my gosh, look at history was made here. I mean, Ty Cobb held that record for over 50 years, and that happened right there. I mean, those are important things.
Yep.
Well, by the time this podcast comes out, you guys can check out our recommended readings on the website. There will be a review on there. There will also be a link for Gene's book. Gene, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate you dropping some knowledge on the history, especially during Prohibition.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Where can people find you? Can you give out your website, Facebook, Twitter? Where can people reach out?
Sure. I'm at JeanScheffler.com. It's JeanScheffler. And Twitter is Gene Scheff, Scheff. Or they can like the Sugar House book on Facebook. And I put little tidbits of Detroit history out there all the time.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been seeing those come through. It's interesting stuff that you post. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I just, for you to ask me to talk about the history of Detroit for an hour, it's like my kids probably rolling their eyes. Oh, my gosh.
Flew by,
though. Make her happier, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the chance to get the word out and let people know what a great place we have, and what we can save it, and hey, read the Sugar House and learn a little more.
Heck yeah, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, get the book, read up on it.
Enjoy Detroit.
City of Detroit. This is where the IGC rolls. So, all right, guys, thanks for listening. Appreciate that. If you like the podcast, share it out, send it to a friend. You can support the podcast by, hitting us up on Twitter, Facebook, subscribing on iTunes. Ratings and reviews really help get the word out. It helps the metrics or whatever that is to get other listeners in. You can check out the support page. You can donate to us. Just use the affiliate links. Anything you use during those links, we get a cut of it. Doesn't cost you anything extra, so works out pretty good. We're going to have some Detroit music from Secrets that brings us out here. And hang loose out there, everybody. Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
Gene, thanks again.
Thanks, Gene.
Thank you.
All right, hang loose, guys.
I never said I was a gentleman.